Call your son. I want to marry him.
Please have mercy on us.
A hush falls over the candlelit corridors of a forgotten palace, a place where silence is not peace, but fear. Behind heavy doors, velvet curtains, and golden walls, there lived a queen whose beauty was spoken of across kingdoms. Her face shone like the morning star, her voice like a gentle hymn. Men of noble birth dreamed of her hand, believing that to marry her would mean glory, wealth, and a crown of power. But none of them knew the truth that lingered in the shadows of her throne. None of them understood that her beauty was a cage and her hand a noose. For every man who entered her chamber as a husband was carried out before the morning sun as a corpse. Love should have been her gift. Instead, it became her weapon. Her name is mostly forgotten now, erased from scrolls and buried in dust. But her story, her curse, remains like a whisper in the dark, a whisper that tells of a queen who turned her wedding bed into a grave. Once, the kingdom celebrated her weddings with grand feasts. Trumpets echoed across the hills. Tables overflowed with wine and meat, and courtiers sang songs of joy. Fathers of noble sons begged for a favor, offering their heirs in hope of joining the royal line. Every groom stepped forward with pride, wearing silks, gold, and the promise of eternal love. But when dawn came, joy turned to dread. The first husband, struck down in the very heart of his wedding night, was found cold and lifeless. His death was hidden beneath excuses. Illness, they said, a cruel accident. The kingdom believed for a time, yet soon the same tragedy unfolded again. And again, one husband after another met the same end. Their bodies carried silently from the royal bedchamber as the queen remained untouched, serene, and radiant. Her smile never faltered. Her hands bore no stain. But the whispers grew. The people began to call her cursed. Some said she was chosen by demons. Others claimed her beauty was not natural at all, but purchased with a terrible pact, a pact that demanded the lives of her husbands as payment for her eternal youth. Still, suitors came. Desire for a crown has always been stronger than fear of death. Princes and dukes crossed borders, swearing their devotion, hoping they might be the one to break her curse or survive her embrace. Yet, not one man returned. Inside the palace, the truth was clearer. Servants carried bodies in silence. Guards averted their eyes when crimson stains appeared upon the bedsheets. No one dared ask questions. For who would accuse a queen? Who would risk their life by speaking against a woman who ruled them all? The priests grew restless, their prayers filled with unease. Marriage was meant to be holy, yet within her walls, it had become unholy, twisted, and cruel. The sanctity of love turned to ash with every vow she made. And still, the queen continued. There was no end to her hunger, no mercy in her reign. Some claimed she killed not from rage, but from pleasure, that her eyes glowed brightest not in daylight, but in the dark hours when her husbands drew their last breath. Others whispered she drank from their veins, using blood as a secret elixir. Whether such stories were true or not, one thing was certain: each husband died, and she endured. The kingdom changed under her shadow. Sons no longer dreamed of marrying a queen. They prayed to escape her gaze. Fathers begged for their heirs to be overlooked, fearing their families would be swallowed whole by her appetite for death. Festivals of love, once joyous, turned silent. Wedding bells no longer brought happiness, but dread, even outside her palace walls. The people began to fear the act of marriage itself. What had once been a bond of hope became a bond of doom. Her curse was no longer her own. It had spread into the hearts of the people, infecting every thought of love with suspicion and fear. But the cruelest truth of all was this: the queen never needed to lift a blade herself. No weapon was found in her chambers, no mark of violence upon the bodies. The grooms simply withered away in the dark, their lives snuffed out as if love itself had betrayed them. This mystery only deepened the terror. Was it poison slipped into wine, a toxin hidden upon her lips, or something darker, a force unseen that she alone could command? No one knew. No one dared to ask. Her legend grew like ivy upon a crumbling wall, wrapping itself around every stone of the kingdom. The cruel queen became less a woman and more a ghostly figure, drifting through corridors that reeked of death. The walls seemed to whisper of her crimes. Servants swore they heard footsteps when no one walked, felt cold drafts even as fires roared. The palace itself became her accomplice, an eternal witness to the trail of graves left in her name. What makes her story most haunting is not the deaths themselves, but the way the world allowed them. Power silenced justice. Fear tied the tongues of men. No council dared challenge her. No noble sought revenge. Every family that lost a son wept in silence, unwilling to defy the crown. In this way, she reigned not only with beauty, but with terror. And so, every wedding became a performance, a cruel theater where love was promised by day and destroyed by night. Her face shone at the altar. Her vows carried weight. Her smile promised devotion. Yet beneath that mask, there was no tenderness, only the certainty of death. The cruel queen had rewritten the very meaning of marriage. In time, her story slipped into legend. Her name was erased, but her shadow lingered. The people dared not write her deeds in ink, yet they carried her memory in whispers. Parents warned their children not to chase beauty too blindly. Lovers prayed that passion would not hide cruelty. Because if history teaches anything, it is that even the brightest crown can conceal the darkest soul. Her tale remains, not as a story of love, but as a warning of what happens when power turns intimacy into a weapon, when marriage becomes a sentence, and when beauty itself becomes a curse. She is remembered only as the queen who transformed her wedding nights into funerals, the woman who stole breath in the very moment vows were spoken. Her name is lost, but her whisper still drifts through time, the whisper of a queen who killed husbands on their wedding night. Fear is a silent poison. It spreads without voice, without face, yet it lingers in every corner of a kingdom until even the air feels heavy. That was the breath of the land ruled by the cruel queen. Her beauty still glowed like firelight, but beneath it lay a shadow so deep that none could escape its reach. Every family of noble blood lived with the same dread. Sons who once dreamed of crowns now prayed for anonymity. To be chosen by the queen was no honor, no blessing, but a sentence written in silk and sealed with death. Fathers whispered to their sons, "Do not draw her gaze." Mothers held their children tightly, fearing that one day a letter from the palace would arrive, summoning their heir to be her next groom. And all knew what that letter meant: a wedding in daylight, a corpse by morning. The people had learned to read the signs. When bells rang for marriage, they did not cheer. They did not feast or sing. Instead, silence spread like morning before the vows were even spoken. The streets emptied, the market stalls closed, and windows were barred. For everyone knew that by nightfall, the palace would echo with screams no feast could mask. Even servants of the court lived in terror. They polished the silver, laid the feast, dressed the queen in bridal silk, all the while knowing they prepared a man's grave. Their hands trembled as they placed wine on the tables, as they tied knots on garments. Some prayed beneath their breath. Others turned cold, their souls dulled by years of carrying lifeless bodies through secret doors before dawn. No servant dared to speak aloud what they saw, but whispers still spread, as whispers always do. They spread like smoke through corridors and taverns, carried by trembling tongues. Stories of the queen's chambers, doors locked, cries muffled, silence broken by one final gasp. Yet what unsettled the kingdom most was not only the deaths, but the mystery. No one had ever seen the queen kill. No blade was found, no wound upon the bodies, no trace of poison in the cups. Each man was simply gone, stripped of life as though the very act of love had drained them. This mystery deepened the fear. For how does one fight what cannot be seen? How does a man prepare for a danger that hides in a kiss, in a touch, in the warmth of a marriage bed? Priests searched for answers. They poured through holy texts, seeking curses, demons, explanations for such unholy unions. Some declared that she was cursed by the gods for vanity. Others whispered that she had made a pact, trading her husband's lives for her youth and power. But none could prove anything, and the queen never spoke. Her silence was sharper than any blade. Nobles gathered in secret, their faces pale with grief and anger. Sons were dying, names were vanishing, bloodlines were thinning. Families of wealth and power were reduced to ashes after a single night beneath her crown. Yet no one dared confront her. To accuse a queen was to invite execution. To defy her was to lose not just sons, but entire houses. So they endured. They allowed the slaughter to continue. Fear bound them more tightly than any chain. Beyond the palace walls, common folk watched the events with growing horror. They spoke of her not as a queen, but as a phantom. To them, she was less flesh and more shadow, a ghost who fed on the living. Mothers warned daughters never to envy queens. Lovers prayed that their unions would never be cursed with such blood. Festivals of love dwindled. Wedding songs were sung more quietly, if at all. Where once marriage had been a time of hope, it became a season of unease. The cruel queen had poisoned not only her husbands, but the very meaning of marriage itself. In the palace, life continued as though nothing were amiss. Each marriage was celebrated with pomp, as though the court hoped to hide the death that would soon follow. But the masks grew thinner with every passing year. The musicians played more softly, their hands shaking as they touched strings. The dancers moved without spirit, their eyes filled with dread. Even laughter sounded hollow, like brittle glass ready to break. The queen alone remained unchanged, always radiant, always calm, always untouchable. Her eyes gave nothing away. Her lips never confessed. And yet, her smile was enough to silence questions, enough to remind every courtier that beauty, when sharpened by cruelty, was more dangerous than any sword. There were those who tried to resist. One young nobleman refused to present his son. When summoned, his body was later found hanging from the city gates, marked as a traitor. His son disappeared soon after, delivered to the palace regardless. The wedding was swift. The dawn was silent. Such examples crushed what little courage remained. Resistance became unthinkable. The queen's rule was law, and her law was written in blood. The priests finally began to curse her name in secret. They spoke of her as a blasphemy, a woman who had twisted holy vows into instruments of death. But none dared preach it from a pulpit, for to denounce her was to invite the same fate as her husbands. In silence, the kingdom decayed. Children who once played at marriage now shuddered at the thought. Girls whispered of poisoned lips. Boys trembled when they heard wedding bells. What had once been joy became dread, passed down from fathers to sons, mothers to daughters. The queen's shadow reached into every home, twisting love into suspicion. Even the seasons seemed touched by her cruelty. Springs felt colder, summers less bright. Each year, as another wedding was announced, the people braced themselves for mourning. The land itself seemed cursed. And yet, no savior came. No hero rose. No army marched. The cruel queen remained untouchable. Her beauty, her shield, her crown, her weapon. Every night she destroyed love, and every dawn she walked untouched into the light. The kingdom learned to live in fear. Fear of letters. Fear of bells. Fear of the queen who ruled them not with armies or decrees, but with the death of husbands and the silence of wives. But fear cannot last forever without breaking. And within the silence of palace walls, darker truths began to grow. Servants whispered of hidden rooms, of secret rituals carried out in the hours before dawn. They swore the queen's chambers were more than chambers, that they were shrines to something unspeakable. Some claimed to hear chanting in the night. Others said they saw shadows moving where no shadows should be. The queen was no longer merely cruel. She was becoming something else, something no longer bound to flesh and blood. And so the kingdom held its breath, drenched in fear, waiting for the day when her reign of silence would reveal the truth of what she truly was. The cruel queen's story had only begun, and the night was far from over. The first groom was the beginning of it all, the first man to step into her shadow with pride, unaware that it would cost him his life. He was young, noble, and strong. His family had long sought power, and the queen's hand seemed to them a blessing from the heavens. To marry her was to inherit wealth, prestige, and perhaps one day, a crown of his own. He believed fortune had chosen him. He believed his name would shine in history as the man who ruled beside her. But fate had chosen differently. On the morning of the wedding, the kingdom awoke to celebration. The palace bells rang with thunder, their echoes rolling across valleys and villages. Banners were raised on high towers, embroidered in gold and crimson. Trumpets blared, summoning nobles and peasants alike to witness what many thought would be the beginning of a golden era. The groom arrived in garments of silk, his cloak lined with fur, his crown of betrothal glistening in the sun. His smile was wide, his eyes bright, his heart filled with hope. He believed he was walking toward love. He believed he was walking toward power. The queen greeted him with her famous beauty. Her face was serene, her smile graceful, her eyes calm as still water. She gave no sign of cruelty, no hint of the curse that clung to her name. To the world, she was perfection. To him, she was destiny. The wedding feast was grand. Tables overflowed with roasted boar, honeyed fruits, and rivers of red wine. Courtiers danced, musicians played, and guests raised their cups in forced cheer. Yet behind the laughter, unease lingered. Some glanced nervously at the groom, whispering quietly as though they already knew what fate awaited him. The groom noticed none of it. He looked only at his queen, who sat by his side like a vision from another world. He leaned toward her, whispering promises of devotion, dreaming of heirs, of victories, of eternal love. She nodded politely. Her lips curved into a delicate smile. No one knew whether that smile was warmth or warning. When the vows were spoken, the groom's voice rang clear through the great hall. He swore loyalty, love, and eternal faith. His words trembled with sincerity, with passion, with a hunger for both the queen and the throne. The queen's voice followed, soft, musical, almost tender. She repeated the vows as custom required, her tone flawless. To the guests, it seemed a perfect match, a union of beauty and strength, a bond blessed before God and man. But in her eyes, there was nothing, no spark, no devotion, no flame, only the hollow calm of a woman who already knew how the story would end. Night fell, the feast ended. Guests departed, their laughter brittle, their faces pale. The groom, flushed with wine and hope, walked with his bride to the royal chambers. He held her hand, speaking with excitement, dreaming of the life they would share. The doors closed behind them. The guards turned their faces away. And then silence. No servant entered. No witness remained. The chamber was sealed to the world. What passed within those walls will never be written, never be proven, never be fully known. Some whispered she gave him wine laced with hidden poison. Others claimed she pressed her lips to his and drew the very breath from his body. Still others spoke of darker arts, rituals carried out in candlelight, whispers in a tongue no man should speak. All that is certain is this: when the dawn broke, the throne beside her was empty. The groom's body was removed before sunrise. Guards carried it quietly through shadowed corridors, wrapped in linen, hidden from eyes. His family was told he had suffered an accident, a sudden illness, a tragic, unavoidable fate. But no one believed it. The court had seen him strong and smiling only hours before. The people had watched him ride tall through the gates. He was not a man to crumble in one night. Rumors grew quickly, carried from mouth to mouth, until the entire kingdom knew the truth they were forbidden to speak. He had not died by chance. He had died by her hand. Still, the queen showed no grief. She walked the cold corridors in silence, her gown trailing like mist. Her face betrayed no sorrow, no guilt, no fear. She ordered no mourning. She spoke no prayers. Within days, she resumed her reign as though nothing had happened. The first husband was buried without honor, without crown, without memory. His name, once spoken with pride, became a hushed warning. His death was the beginning of whispers that would haunt the kingdom for years to come. The nobles who had celebrated the wedding now trembled in their halls. Fathers clutched their sons, praying they would not be chosen next. Mothers wept in secret, knowing that beauty and power had become snares for their bloodlines. Yet none dared speak openly. None dared accuse. The queen's smile silenced all. Her silence was her weapon, her beauty her shield. But the whispers could not be silenced. They grew in corners, in taverns, in cloisters. Priests muttered that the union had been cursed before it began. Servants swore they heard cries echoing through the locked chamber doors. Some said the queen's shadow had moved when her body had not. The kingdom was drenched in fear, but now that fear had a name. It was not war. It was not famine. It was not plague. It was marriage. The first groom's death poisoned every heart. Men who had once dreamed of crowns now prayed to remain unseen. Love, once a source of joy, became a cause of dread. Parents no longer sought the queen's favor for their sons. Instead, they prayed she would look elsewhere. The queen's curse had begun. It would not end with one husband. Her first groom had believed he would live a life of glory. He had believed her beauty was a blessing, but he had walked blind into her embrace, blind into her shadow, blind into a death that would echo across generations. His fate was hidden behind palace doors, whispered as an accident, but remembered as murder. The death of the first groom could have been excused. An illness, a misstep, a cruel trick of fate. That is what the court told itself. That is what the people were forced to believe. But when the second groom fell, and then the third, and then the fourth, no one could deny that fate was not at work. It was something far darker. Each marriage began in splendor. Golden banners draped the palace walls. Candles blazed in their thousands, and choirs filled the air with songs of devotion. The queen stood as radiant as a dawn, a vision that silenced every doubt. Her beauty, so disarming that men forgot the whispers surrounding her. But dawn never brought joy. Dawn always brought death. The second groom was young, bold, and reckless. He laughed at rumors, mocking the tales that described the queen as cursed. Fear is for cowards, he declared to his companions. A man who holds the hand of a queen holds eternity. His pride blinded him to the warnings, and when his summons came, he welcomed it. The wedding was a display of grandeur. He paraded to the capital, waving to crowds who cheered with trembling voices. The feast was heavy with wine, and his laughter rose louder than all others. He boasted of his future, of heirs yet unborn, of the power that would soon be his. But by morning, the boastful groom was gone. His body was removed before sunrise, his lips still twisted in a smile that now seemed mocking even in death. The court announced another accident, but the whispers grew bolder. The curse was no longer shadow. It was flesh. It was real. The third groom came from far away, a prince of another land. His union was not born of love, but of alliance. His family believed that binding blood to the queen's house would strengthen kingdoms, would cement power across borders. They knew the risks, yet they sent him willingly, sacrificing a son for a chance at glory. He arrived with gifts, jewels, silks, horses fit for war. He spoke of treaties, of peace, of prosperity. The people prayed this union would endure, for it promised stability in a land drowning in fear. But the queen's chambers are no place for stability. By dawn, the foreign prince lay lifeless. His body was returned to his homeland wrapped in white linen. His family, humiliated and enraged, called it treachery, but dared not march against her. For who could battle, a queen whispered, to be more fan than flesh. The fourth groom was the boldest of them all. He had heard the stories, seen the funerals, watched the silence of the court. Yet he believed himself different. She has killed weak men, he said, but I am strong. I will survive what others could not. His arrogance became his doom. On his wedding night, he was heard shouting through the doors. Servants swore they heard the sound of a struggle, furniture breaking, voices raised in rage. But by morning, the chamber was silent again. When the doors opened, the queen stood alone, her gown untouched, her face calm. The groom was gone, another name erased, another family broken. And so a pattern emerged, a cycle as predictable as a rising sun. A wedding feast by day, a funeral by dawn. The courtiers noticed. They whispered among themselves, each afraid to speak too loudly, each aware that silence was the only shield they had. The pattern was undeniable, yet no one dared question it. To accuse her would be to challenge death itself. And so the game continued. In the queen's eyes, marriage was never a bond. It was never a promise. It was a snare, a gilded trap, a ritual she performed with grace, but never with love. Each husband was nothing more than prey. Lured by beauty, captured by vows, destroyed by dawn. Her smile became the sharpest blade of all. Her kiss, the deadliest poison. Families trembled when her gaze fell upon them. Noblemen bribed priests to hide their sons. Fathers sent heirs to distant lands, disguising absence as duty. But the queen always found another. No one could hide from her will. One by one, grooms were chosen. One by one, they vanished into the shadows of her chamber. The palace itself began to change. Its halls grew colder, its windows darker. Servants whispered that the walls absorbed sorrow, that the stone itself remembered the cries of men who never returned. Some swore that at night, footsteps echoed through empty corridors, not from the living, but from the restless dead who still sought freedom. The pattern of death reached beyond the palace gates. The kingdom itself seemed poisoned. Weddings among common folk became rare. Young men resisted marriage, fearing that to wed at all might draw her gaze. Love turned bitter. Trust crumbled. Families fractured beneath the weight of dread. It was not only her husband she destroyed, but the very idea of marriage itself. And yet, the queen remained untouched. Her beauty did not fade. Her power did not weaken. Her smile never cracked. She reigned not with armies, not with decrees, but with the fear of every man and woman who looked upon her. Some said she was cursed by the gods. Others whispered she was not cursed, but chosen, granted unnatural gifts in exchange for lives taken. And some, the boldest and most fearful, dared to believe she killed not from curse or duty, but from pleasure. By the fourth groom, there was no longer denial. The queen's pattern was fixed, her cruelty set like stone. But still, suitors came. Some were driven by desperation for power, others by arrogance, and still others by ignorance. Each believed he might escape where others had failed. Each believed he was stronger, smarter, different. Each believed the queen might love him, and each became another whisper, another body, another name carved into silence. The cruel queen had woven her own kind of justice, though none dared name it as such. To her, perhaps, marriage was not union, but vengeance. Each husband became a victim in a ritual that no man could survive. The people began to wonder, was this pattern her will alone, or was she the servant of something far darker? A shadow that demanded sacrifice? A hunger greater than her own? Whatever the answer, the kingdom had entered a cycle that seemed without end. Marriage was no longer hope. It was no longer joy. It was a chain of funerals, a procession of grief, a pattern of death that bound the land tighter with each passing year. And in the queen's eyes, it was not tragedy. It was destiny. Her reign of death was only beginning. The pattern was set. The kingdom was silent. The courtiers trembled, and the whispers grew louder with each body carried from her chamber. The cruel queen had made marriage her trap, and soon she would weave secrets even darker within its walls. Whispers grew darker. The people no longer asked whether the queen killed her husbands. They asked why. Some claimed she delighted in it, that her greatest joy was found not in vows, not in love, but in the moment when hope in a man's eyes turned to terror. They said she savored the power of it, to take a life at the very moment when it should have been most secure, to destroy trust when it was most tender, to turn love into a weapon and wield it as a crown. Others whispered of vanity. They said she did not kill out of hatred or revenge, but out of hunger, that she fed her youth with the lifeblood of her husbands, that with every death, her skin grew fairer, her eyes brighter, her beauty untouched by time. While others aged, she remained unchanged, a flower that never withered, watered by the veins of men. Whether myth or truth, the result was always the same. A queen draped in silk, radiant and eternal. A husband draped in death, silent and forgotten. The palace began to live under these whispers. Servants crossed themselves when passing her chamber doors, fearing the echoes that lingered there. Some claimed they heard laughter on nights when a groom died, a low and chilling sound that seeped through stone walls. Others swore they saw her emerge at dawn with lips redder than before, her cheeks flushed as if nourished by something more than sleep. Her beauty itself became a curse. To look upon her was to feel both desire and dread. Men could not resist her face. Yet to love her was to embrace death. Priests argued in secret. Some believed she had bound herself to a pact, a bargain with forces unseen, in return for eternal youth. She gave the lives of her husbands as tribute. Others called her a demon, clothed in human skin, feeding on love as wolves feed on lambs. And yet, despite their horror, none dared to speak against her in public, for she was queen. Her crown was holy, even if her hands were unclean. The church fell silent. The court fell silent. Only the people continued to whisper. One tale spoke a servant girl who was ordered to wash the queen's silks after wedding night. She found crimson stains deep in the fabric, stains that no water could cleanse. When she returned the garments, the queen looked at her with eyes so sharp the girl fainted where she stood. She never spoke again, her tongue bound by terror. Another story told of a guard who swore he saw the queen kneeling by her husband's body. Her lips pressed to his throat as if drinking what remained. By dawn, the guard vanished from the palace, his name erased from records, his family left in silence. But not all whispers condemned her. Some spoke with awe, not fear. They said she had found the secret of eternity, the key to power men could never touch. While kings needed armies and priests needed prayers, the queen needed only her smile and a husband foolish enough to believe in her love. To some, she was no longer a woman, but a goddess of death. Her vanity grew with each passing year. Mirrors lined her chambers, polished until they gleamed like water. She gazed into them often, touching her face, tracing her lips, studying her skin for signs of age. None appeared. Time obeyed her as obeyed no one else. While nobles wrinkled and servants bent with years, she remained untouched, glowing as if her youth was eternal. The people asked, was it her beauty that killed, or the deaths that fed her beauty? No answer ever came. Her cruelty reached beyond her husband's. At feasts, she mocked noblemen who trembled before her. She toyed with suitors, luring them close with gentle words, only to dismiss them with a smile that chilled their bones. She treated affection as a game, as though the love of men was nothing but fuel for her vanity. And yet, suitors still came. Ambition is blind and desire deaf. Men saw her beauty and forgot the graves behind her. Families sought crowns and ignored the cost. Each new husband believed he might be different. Each one believed love would save him. But love did not save. Love only destroyed. Some courtiers began to wonder if she enjoyed not just the act of killing, but the silence that followed. To watch families crumble, to see noble lines extinguished, to feel the entire kingdom bend beneath her terror. Power itself may have been her true pleasure, a pleasure fed by the blood of those who trusted her. Her chamber was no marriage bed. It was a throne of cruelty, a place where vows became traps and desire became execution. As the pattern grew, so too did the fear. The people no longer believed in chance or accident. They saw a queen who destroyed deliberately, who fed upon husbands as others feed upon bread. Each death was not tragedy, but design, carefully hidden beneath silk, concealed behind closed doors. Her cruelty was no longer rumor, it was legend. And yet the question remained, what drove her? Was it vanity, pleasure, power, or something darker still, a hunger that could never be named? Some claimed she was cursed by love itself, forced to destroy every man she touched. Others said she was cursed not by love, but by hatred, hatred of men, hatred of bonds, hatred of marriage itself. But whether curse or choice, the result was the same. A kingdom drenched in sorrow, husbands buried, families broken, and a queen who never aged, never faltered, never showed remorse. The cruel queen's hidden pleasure was her greatest weapon. It was a secret that kept the court silent, the nobles submissive, the priests cautious, and the people trembling. For no one could prove it, yet no one could deny it. And in that silence, she thrived. The whispers grew louder with each year. By the fifth groom, no one even pretended it was fate. By the sixth, even the bravest men trembled in her presence. By the seventh, the kingdom began to wonder not if she would stop, but if she could stop. For beauty had become her curse, and her curse had become her pleasure. But the cruel queen's story did not end with whispers alone. Darker secrets waited behind chamber doors, secrets that no servant dared speak. secret so it stained not just a name, but the very soul of her kingdom. As the years passed, the shadow of the queen stretched far beyond the palace walls. It crept into homes, into churches, into fields where children once played without fear. The kingdom lived not under the rule of law, nor under the mercy of faith, but under the weight of the curse that had no name, yet was felt by every soul. Fathers prayed each night that their sons would be spared. They begged heaven that no letter sealed with the queen's crest would arrive at their gates. Mothers clutched their children, whispering lullabies that were not songs of joy but desperate pleas. Their tears fell quietly, for to weep aloud was to risk drawing the queen's gaze. Marriage, once the pride of noble houses, became a mark of doom. What had been the dream of every family, union with royalty, was now their greatest terror. A son chosen by the queen was not honored. He was condemned. The curse poisoned the heart of love itself. Couples who once held hands with joy now did so in secret, fearing that any show of devotion might catch the queen's attention. Weddings among the common folk grew rare. The bells that had once tolled for celebration now tolled only in dread. Songs of courtship vanished from the streets. Poets abandoned the language of love, turning instead to verses of sorrow and lament. Even the laughter of brides grew faint, as though joy itself had been stolen. The queen's curse did not stop with her grooms. It spread like smoke, suffocating every chamber, every chapel, every heart. Families began to wither. Noble lines that had survived generations ended in silence, their heirs buried beneath the queen's shadow. Once great houses became whispers, their names remembered only as victims of her cruelty. Wealth and titles meant nothing if a son was summoned to her chamber. All that remained was grief, heavy and endless. The court watched helplessly. They dressed in silks, bowed their heads, and feigned smiles. But behind closed doors, they trembled. Fathers sent sons to distant lands, disguising exile as opportunity. Others tried to bribe priests to erase their sons' names from the royal records. But the queen always found another. Her was like a net. Every struggle only tightened its hold. The people called it a curse, though no priest dared confirm it. Some said she was cursed by the gods, doomed to destroy love wherever she found it. Others believed the curse was her own choosing, a pact she had embraced, a hunger she had accepted in exchange for beauty and power. Whatever the truth, it mattered little. The result was the same, a kingdom drowning in sorrow. Even children learned to fear her. Young boys who once dreamed of marrying queens now prayed for obscurity. Girls who had once played at being brides now abandoned their games, their laughter fading into silence. Love became not a dream, but a shadow that haunted even the youngest hearts. The curse reached the church itself. Priests who once blessed unions with joy now did so with trembling hands. They feared their sacred vows had been twisted into weapons. Some believed marriage itself had been defiled, no longer holy, no longer safe. A few dared to whisper that the queen had broken not only mortal law, but divine order. But no sermons condemned her, no prayers named her. Silence was the church's only defense. To speak her name was to risk death, and so the priests, like the nobles, bent their heads and prayed in secret. The land changed. The harvest grew thinner, as if the soil itself recoiled from the queen's reign. Springs that had once run clear turned murky. Even the animals grew restless, their cries echoing in the night like omens. The people said the land had absorbed too much grief, that the tears of widows had salted the fields, that the ground could no longer bear life. In the villages, mothers carried charms of iron to ward off the queen's curse. Fathers burned herbs at their doorways, hoping the smoke would shield their sons. But no charm, no prayer, no offering could stop her will. The queen's shadow was heavier than faith, stronger than hope. And still, weddings continued. She demanded them, and none could refuse. Each feast was a grotesque play, a hollow celebration where wine flowed and music rose. Yet every heart was cold. The people did not cheer, they waited. They waited for the inevitable silence that followed each dawn. By the time the queen emerged, radiant and calm, another man was gone, another family broken, another name swallowed by her curse. The pattern had become eternal. Some believed the curse had grown beyond her. that it no longer belonged to the queen alone. They whispered that love itself had been poisoned in the kingdom, that even marriages untouched by her hand grew fragile, collapsing under suspicion and dread. Husbands and wives turned cold, trust shattered. Families broke apart not by death, but by despair. The queen had not only killed men, she had killed faith and love itself. Among the people, despair turned to hatred. Mothers cursed her name when no one was listening. Fathers clenched their fists at night, dreaming of rebellion they would never dare attempt. Some peasants even fled the land, abandoning homes and heritage to escape her shadow. Yet none dared rise against her. For every rumor of rebellion ended in silence. Every voice of defiance was soon gone. The curse did not only take husbands, it took courage. And so the kingdom sank deeper into shadow. Generations passed with no relief. Children were born into fear, raised in silence, and buried in sorrow. No poet sang of love, no bard sang of joy. Even the stars seemed dimmer, as though the heavens themselves had turned away. The cruel queen's curse was no longer her secret. It had become the kingdom's truth. But shadows, no matter how heavy, always carry deeper secrets within them. Secrets of chambers locked, of cries hidden, of truths too dark for even whispers. The queen's chambers became the most feared place in the kingdom. To the courtiers, they were a sanctuary of silk and gold, adorned with jewels and scented with flowers. To the servants, they were a prison, a room where life entered but never returned. By day, the chambers gleamed. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, catching upon silver mirrors and gilded frames. The queen's bed was dressed in fine linens, embroidered with threads of gold. Musicians sometimes played in the adjoining hall, their songs meant to fill the air with harmony. To a visitor, it might have seemed a place of love, of comfort, of beauty, but by night, those same walls became stained with shadows. Candles flickered against stone, their light revealing not joy, but unease. Locks turned, bolts slid into place, and the queen entered with her chosen husband. The doors closed, and what followed was never spoken aloud. Servants whispered of cries echoing through the corridors, not cries of passion, but of terror, desperate voices begging for life, cut short by silence. Some swore they heard the thud of bodies striking the floor, followed by dragging footsteps. Others claimed the walls themselves seemed to hold the sound, releasing faint echoes long after the doors had been sealed. One maid spoke of sleepless nights, lying awake and listening to what she called the voices of the dying. She said the cries carried through the palace stones, seeping into her bones, haunting her dreams. She left the queen's service soon after, but her tale spread like fire. There were guards who carried darker stories. They stood watch outside the doors, forbidden to enter no matter what sounds reached their ears. Some admitted in hushed tones that they had seen figures carried out before dawn, bodies wrapped in linen, hidden beneath cloaks, dragged through hidden passageways to avoid the eyes of the court. One soldier claimed he saw blood on the marble floors just beyond the threshold, hurriedly wiped clean by trembling servants. Another swore he glimpsed the pale face of a dead groom beneath the shroud before it was taken to the crypt. These men spoke only in shadows, but confessed too loudly was to vanish as surely as the husbands themselves. The chambers grew infamous. Courtiers avoided even walking past them at night. Servants crossed themselves when they cleaned the adjoining halls. Some believed the very walls had absorbed the deaths within them. They said the stone was no longer stone but a sponge of sorrow, soaked with blood and whispers. Even in daylight, the rooms felt colder. Fires burned in the hearth, yet the air clung damp and heavy, as though morning lingered in every corner. Mirrors cracked without reason, flowers withered within hours, and candles sputtered as if suffocated. The palace itself seemed to resist the queen's chambers, as though the building carried its own fear. Legends grew. Some said the chambers were cursed by sorcery, that hidden symbols were carved into the bedposts, symbols meant to bind husbands in helplessness. Others spoke of poisons dusted upon the sheets, invisible powders that seeped into skin, taking life slowly and without struggle. But darker whispers claimed the queen herself was the weapon, that her touch was venom, her kiss a blade, her embrace a ritual that drained life from the very veins of her lovers. whether truth or superstition. Every dawn delivered the same answer: a husband gone and a queen still radiant. For the people, the chambers became a symbol of betrayal. Weddings should have been holy, yet here vows were mocked, love was corrupted, and trust was devoured. The marriage bed, meant to bring families together, had become a place of execution. Parents shuddered at the thought of their sons crossing that threshold. Wives prayed that their own chambers would not inherit such doom. The queen's chambers were no longer rooms. They were a graveyard with silken sheets. The priests feared the chambers most of all, though none dared enter. They felt the corruption spreading from within. They whispered that demons had made their home there, feeding on every vow, every death, every broken promise. They claimed the chambers had become a temple not to God, but to something far darker. Some said the chambers themselves were alive, that they drank the tears of widows, the cries of dying men, and the silence of those who dared not speak. Walls do not breathe, yet here, the very air seemed to move like a living thing. Yet the queen walked freely within. She slept upon those beds without fear. She rose each dawn untouched, her face serene, her beauty unchanged. Whatever haunted those walls did not haunt her. It served her. It cloaked her. It crowned her with a darkness no mortal hand could strip away. Even outside the palace, the story spread. Farmers spoke a glow that sometimes escaped the queen's windows at night, as though strange fires burned within. Travelers passing by swore they heard muffled screams carried on the wind. Mothers told their children never to look at the palace after dusk, for fear the queen's shadow might follow them home. The chambers had become more than a room. They were the heart of her legend, and still no one acted. The nobles bowed, the priests prayed, the servants whispered, but no hand moved against her, for fear ruled stronger than justice. Silence weighed heavier than courage. Every husband who entered the queen's chamber carried hope in his eyes. Every dawn, his body carried only death, and with each death, the curse grew deeper. The chambers themselves became a forbidden place. Even when empty, they held power. No servant dared linger. No guard dared cross the threshold without command. Even the queen's closest advisors hesitated at the doors, as though the very stone might swallow them whole. Every wall held secrets that bled into the floors, that clung to the air, that whispered through the night, secrets too dark for light to touch. The cruel queen's chambers had become her kingdom within a kingdom, a world where she alone held power, a place where marriage was not a promise, but a death sentence. And though no one dared speak it, all knew the truth. The queen's reign was not upon her throne, but within those silken, blood-soaked walls. But the chambers, for all their silence, could not bury every secret. Too many whispers escaped. Too many servants saw what they should not. Too many families lost sons and began to question the power that silenced them. And from these whispers, from this growing unrest, the queen's story would take yet another turn, one that would test not only her power, but the fear that bound the kingdom itself. No priest, no noble, no king dared accuse her. She ruled untouchable, wrapped in her crown of cruelty, her throne more secure than stone, her smile sharper than any sword. Power silenced justice. Fear chained the kingdom. For how could anyone accuse a queen who carried no visible blade, no poison, no proof? Husbands entered her chambers alive. Husbands left them lifeless. Yet there was never a witness, never evidence, never a crime that could be named aloud. To accuse her was to court death. To question her was to vanish. The priests trembled at their pulpits. They knew her vows were mockeries, that her unions mocked the sanctity of marriage, but their sermons were filled only with silence. None dared name her in prayer. None dared condemn her before the people. The church itself bent beneath her power, its holy words broken by her unholy reign. Nobles suffered more deeply. Sons were summoned, married, and buried in silence. Whole families lost their heirs, their lines erased in a single night. Yet no noble family rose in rebellion. They feasted at her table, bowed before her throne, and swallowed their grief like poison. To resist her was to invite their own destruction. Even kings of neighboring lands remained silent. They had seen the fate of foreign princes who wed her. Their alliances broken before they began. To march against her would be to march against death itself. And so, the cruel queen remained untouchable. Her reign became a mirror of dread. She ruled not with decrees nor armies, but with absence. The absence of justice, the absence of courage, the absence of love. Every man feared her. Every woman loathed her. Yet none dared to raise a hand. She walked freely through her halls, her silks trailing behind her like rivers of blood. She entered her chambers without fear, slept upon beds soaked in whispers, and emerged at dawn radiant, serene, untouched. The kingdom lived in chains, and those chains were forged not iron, but of silence. Still, suitors came. It seemed impossible, yet ambition is blinder than fear. Men still dreamed of crowns, still longed for beauty, still believed that they, unlike all others, might be the one to tame her heart. They came from noble houses desperate to survive, from foreign courts eager for alliances, from families too greedy to resist her wealth. Each man carried the same belief, that he was different, that his strength, his charm, his devotion would save him where others had failed. But the queen was no prey to be tamed. She was a hunter. One suitor was known for his piety. He prayed before the altar, convinced that holy devotion would shield him from the queen's curse. He entered the chambers with a cross upon his chest, whispering psalms. By dawn, his lips were silent, his cross cold upon his lifeless body. Another suitor was famed for his strength, a warrior who had slain men in battle and conquered fortresses. He believed no woman could destroy him. He entered her chamber boasting that he would leave it alive. By morning, the guards carried him out wrapped in linen, his pride as broken as his breath. Still another suitor swore he loved her, not for her crown, not for her beauty, but truly for her. He believed sincerity would save him, that affection would melt the cruelty in her heart. His vows were soft, his eyes filled with devotion. By dawn, his body was cold beside hers. His love answered only by silence. Each man felt the same way, betrayed by love, devoured by night. And still the pattern endured. Every marriage feast was a funeral in disguise. Trumpets blared by day, dirges echoed by dawn. Flowers adorned the palace halls, only to wither before the morning. The people no longer pretended. They watched each groom march to his death with pity, not joy. Yet no rebellion stirred. No uprising shook the throne. The queen was untouchable, not because she was invincible, but because fear itself was her armor. The cruelest truth was that some began to worship her, not in love, not in loyalty, but in awe. They saw her beauty unfaded, her power unbroken, her reign eternal. They whispered that she was more than human, that she was death itself wearing a crown. And perhaps she was. For no mortal hand held such power, and no mortal justice dared strike her down. The kingdom lived in a strange silence, a world where love was feared, where weddings brought dread, where death followed vows as surely as night followed day. And yet life continued. Fields were sown, markets opened, children were born. The land endured, even as its soul rotted. But beneath the surface, unrest began to stir. Families who had lost heirs whispered in the dark. Priests who had stayed silent too long felt their faith crumble. Servants who carried corpses through hidden halls carried also their secrets. The queen remained untouched, but her kingdom was beginning to fracture under the weight of grief. And yet she smiled. She walked the corridors of her palace as if nothing had changed, her beauty eternal, her crown unshaken. She greeted suitors with gentle words, led them to her chambers, and emerged alone each dawn. To the people, it seemed there would be no end, that she would reign forever, untouched by punishment, unbroken by sorrow, unchallenged by justice. But every reign, no matter how cruel, no matter how powerful, carries within it the seed of its own ruin. And though no one dared accuse her, the day would come when whispers turned to unrest, and unrest turned to defiance. The cruel queen's story was far from over, and her shadow was about to grow darker still. He came last, one final husband, chosen as if fate had saved him for the cruelest end of all. He was spoken of as braver than the others, though some called him foolish. He had seen the funerals, heard the whispers, felt the silence that haunted the kingdom. And yet, when the queen's summons came, he did not hide. He did not flee. He walked into her arms as though he believed he could break a curse that had claimed every man before him. The wedding was quieter than those that came before. The people no longer filled the streets with cheer. Their songs had long since turned to silence. Instead, they watched in dread as the final groom marched through the gates. His face was calm, but his steps were heavy. He wore garments of gold, but his shoulders bent beneath the weight of the crown. The courtiers bowed, but their eyes betrayed pity. Even the priests trembled as they blessed the vows, their voices weak, their hands shaking. For all knew what would follow. No faith, no crown, no courage had saved any before him. Why would this night be different? Yet still he hoped. Some said he prayed through the feast, his lips moving silently even as music played and goblets clattered. His eyes never left the cross upon the altar, as though clinging to heaven itself. Others claimed he spoke boldly, telling the queen that love could not be destroyed, that devotion could conquer even her cruelty. His words, they said, rang with sincerity, though his voice cracked with fear, and some whispered he laughed, drinking deep of wine, pretending to believe he would survive, though all around him knew otherwise. When night came, the feast ended. Guests departed quickly, avoiding each other's eyes. The groom walked beside the queen into her chamber, his steps echoing louder than any music. The doors closed, the bolts slid into place, and the palace held its breath. What happened next has never been agreed upon. Some servants swore they heard prayers, soft at first, then louder, rising into cries of desperation. They claimed the groom begged for mercy, swearing devotion, pleading for his life. His voice carried through the walls until it broke into silence. Others whispered they heard a struggle, furniture crashing, footsteps pounding, the sound of a man fighting for survival. They said the groom tried to resist, tried to break free, but the queen's strength, or the strength of whatever power guarded her, was greater. By dawn, his fight was over, and still others told a stranger tale. They claimed the groom spoke no prayers, raised no fists, but instead sang softly through night, as if defying her cruelty with a hymn of peace. When his voice faded, it was not with terror, but with acceptance. No one knew the truth. No one ever would. What was certain is this. When dawn broke, the queen stood alone. She emerged from her chamber serene, her beauty untouched, her gown flawless. Her eyes betrayed no shadow, no guilt, no sign of the struggle whispered by her servants. She walked the cold corridors as though nothing had happened, as though death had not touched her bed once again. Behind her, guards carried away a body wrapped in linen. Another husband, another name, another silence added to the long list hidden from the world. His death struck the kingdom harder than the rest. Perhaps because he was the last. Perhaps because, after so many gone before him, even hope itself seemed to die with him. The people no longer prayed for deliverance. They no longer whispered of curses or pacts. They simply accepted that marriage to the queen was death, inevitable and unchanging. The curse had devoured every promise, every union, every dream. The hidden list of the dead had grown long, and now it carried one final name. Some believed the last groom had been different, that he had seen something in her eyes before death, something none had noticed, that perhaps he glimpsed regret, or worse, satisfaction. Others swore his prayers echoed long after dawn, carried by the stone walls of the palace, as if his soul refused to be silenced. Some said his spirit haunted the queen, following her steps, whispering in her sleep. But whatever lingered, it did not stop her. She remained untouched. She remained untouchable. The court fell deeper into silence. The priests lowered their eyes. The nobles bowed their heads. No one dared speak of the final groom. His death was recorded as an accident, just as all the others had been. His name erased, his memory buried, his fate hidden behind palace doors. The queen alone endured, her reign unbroken, her beauty eternal. Yet the people remembered. They remembered the cries in the night. They remembered the bodies carried through secret halls. They remembered the names scratched into silence, each one swallowed by her chambers. The kingdom lived beneath her shadow, not with anger, not even with sorrow, but with resignation. They had come to believe she would reign forever, devouring husbands until the end of time. The cruel queen had claimed her final husband, but her story was not finished. For even legends drenched in blood carry a legacy that time cannot erase. And hers was a legacy that would stain not only her own name, but the very idea of love itself. Her shadow was heavy, her silence was endless, and her curse had grown so deep that the kingdom itself seemed bound to it. But even shadows eventually fade. Even curses carry an end. The final husband had fallen, but the queen's reign was not eternal. Something darker still lingered beyond the walls of her chamber, waiting to bring her legend to its close. Time buried her name, but not her legend. The cruel queen who turned marriage into a tomb remained a shadow carved into history, a figure too dark to forget, too dangerous to erase. The scrolls may have hidden her identity, the priests may have burned her records, and the nobles may have silenced her crimes. But her story lived on, not as truth written in ink, but as whispers carried from one generation to the next. She was remembered not for kindness, not for wisdom, not for mercy. She was remembered for turning the vow of marriage, what should have been holy, tender, and eternal, into something poisoned, into something feared. She was the queen who kissed men at the altar and buried them by dawn. She was a bride draped in silk, her grooms draped in shrouds. She was a crown that promised glory but delivered death. Her chambers became the stuff of nightmares. Even long after her death, the palace walls were said to weep with sorrow. Travelers claimed they heard muffled cries at night when passing near the ruins. Some swore that windows flickered with light, though no fire burned inside. Others whispered that her footsteps still echoed down the corridors, searching for a husband who could never escape. The people believed her soul had not found peace. How could it, after feasting upon so much sorrow? They said she wandered restlessly, chained to the very chambers where she had destroyed so many lives. A queen without rest, a bride without love, cursed to haunt her own legend forever. But her legacy was more than a ghost story. She changed how people thought of love itself. In her kingdom, weddings never rang with joy again. Families who once sought power through marriage grew cautious. Mothers warned daughters not to envy crowns. Fathers warned sons not to trust beauty without mercy. Love, once the purest of bonds, now carried suspicion. Her cruelty had poisoned not only her grooms, but the very heart of matrimony. Her story spread far beyond her kingdom. Tales of the cruel queen were carried to neighboring lands, adapted into folklore, hidden in ballads, retold in whispers by firesides. In some lands, she became a monster, a demon clothed in human form. In others, she was a tragic figure cursed by the gods, unable to love without killing. And in others still, she was remembered as a woman who simply chose power over affection, cruelty over compassion, vanity over mercy. No matter the version, the warning was the same. Beauty can deceive, marriage can destroy, and even the brightest crowns can hide the sharpest blades. Her legacy endured because it touched the truth that people feared to admit, that love can be dangerous, that intimacy can be weaponized, that trust can be betrayed in the most sacred of moments. The cruel queen embodied the nightmare that every lover carries in the back of their mind, the fear that devotion may not be returned with devotion but with death. That is why her name is forgotten, but her legend survives. She is not one woman. She is every warning about love turned dark, every whisper of betrayal in bed, every story of vows broken by cruelty. She is not just history. She is a mirror of human fear. Even now, centuries later, her story is told not with laughter, but with unease. Listeners lower their voices when speaking of her, as though afraid she might still be listening. Some believed she was a queen of flesh. Others believed she was a myth, a shadow created to frighten the young. But whether myth or truth, her story remains. And that is enough to give her power. Power she holds to this day. Time may bury names, but it cannot bury the lessons they leave behind. The cruel queen's lesson is simple, yet terrifying. Love is not always safe. Marriage is not always holy. Beauty is not always kind. behind the softest smile, may lie the sharpest cruelty. Her story is not of love, but of fear, not a devotion, but a betrayal, not a marriage, but the darkest side of matrimony. She stands as a warning carved into time itself, a reminder that even in the most sacred vows, shadows may hide. Remember her well. Remember the queen who kissed with silk, but killed with silence. Remember the woman who turned weddings into funerals, who wore youth like a mask, who reigned not with armies but with death. Remember her not for who she was, but for what she represents, the forbidden truth that love can be as cruel as it is beautiful. For even the brightest crowns can hide the sharpest blades. This was Dark Courtships, where we unveil the forbidden, the twisted, and the cruel truths history tried to hide. If her story has left you haunted, if you felt the weight of her silence, the chill of her chambers, the sorrow of her curse, then stay with us. There are more shadows waiting to be revealed, more secrets hidden behind silk and stone, more legends of love twisted into cruelty. Like this story, share it with others who walk the same path of curiosity, and subscribe so you do not miss the next step into history's darkest chambers of love. The cruel queen's whisper fades here, but the shadows remain. And in those shadows, more stories wait to be told.